Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
This is going to be on the promises. The Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous tells us that the spiritual life is not a theory, we have to live it. That's basically what it's saying. And in its broadest sense, spirituality means the breath of life, and that's where we come in here. And we hear about promises. Now, when I came into Al-Anon, I grew up on the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and no one told me that I couldn't have promises. I've heard a lot of groups say, well, we can't have those promises in Al-Anon because, you see, those are for the alcoholics. That's in their book. And then nowhere in our Al-Anon literature do you find anything called the promises. It's interesting, because in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous it says if you've been painstaking about this work up to this point, certain things will begin to happen. And it doesn't say if you're an alcoholic who's working the steps, this will come to happen. It just says if you're doing the work, this will happen. So I like to, I'm the kind of person, I'm greedy. I don't want to miss anything. And so I thought, well, how would it be that only an alcoholic would get the promises? And I thought, bullshit, you know? That doesn't seem fair, you know. It just doesn't seem fair. And I said, well, I think I'm going to start claiming some of them dudes for myself. It's important to me to realize that it's where it is mentioned, what we term as the promises, on page 83 and 84 of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, your handout, I've gone through there to show you just a few of some of the other promises that are found in the book that are not listed as so-called the 12 promises. But some of these are just as vitally important to me as any of the other 12. And I wanted to share with you today a little bit about each one of these promises, and if we have time, we'll go through some of those in the handout, too. We'll have to sort of see how we go here. Like I say, I've never done it before, so I don't know time-wise what we're talking about. If we're still here at 9 o'clock tonight and you feel like you want to go, feel free to do so. Where these are listed in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, it comes between the 9th and 10th step. And I think that's really important because when we're working the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous or Al-Anon in our lives, the first several steps are dedicated to finding out who we are and our relationship to a higher power, and then getting ourselves all right with that power in steps 4 or 5, and then making changes in our life in 6 and 7 so that we're going to be useful members of society. And then we have to become responsible for all the wreckage that we have caused in our past. You know, our part of those things, and that's where 8 and 9 comes about. And then as you begin to do some of these things, as you work those previous 9 steps, you will find that gradually some of these things will begin to come true in your life. And I think many times things were happening in my life and coming true in my life without me actually identifying them as such. And then when I would read them, I'd say, yeah, that happened over here, or yeah, that's happening, or boy, I'd like that one over there, you know. I think the one that stood out to me the most was the one about economic insecurity, you know. The fear of that will go away. It doesn't say you're going to be economically secure. I want to point that one out, you know. But the fear of it's going to go away. You know, you'll learn how to live with that crap, you know, that's what it means. But what we're going to try to do with the promises, to me and in the book, is we're building a bridge between hope and faith. In other words, between our head and our hearts. And we have to have something to hold on to. And to me, the word promise has a big connotation to it. I don't know about y'all. But now, like for instance, between J.D. and I, we would have a lot of problems. And he would do something that would really hurt my feelings. I'd tell him about it, and he'd say, honey, I promise you, I'll never do that again. Yeah, might as well laugh. You're right. And then he would do it again. And then I was twice as hurt because he had broken the promise in addition to doing the deed. And because with that promise, it was like I saw Moses come off of the mountain with the tablets. And it went, cha-chung, and there's the promise right across the tablet, you know. And it was like it's written in stone, and by God, it's going to come to pass. And I put all my hopes into that promise. So you have to realize that promises are on a spiritual nature. Promises are God-given. God can keep His promises. We as human beings don't always keep our promises. And so JD and I found for us, we don't use the word promise between us, and I promise I'll do this or I promise I'll do that. We say, I'll try. God willing, I'll try. I'm going to do my best. But I found for me that the word promise meant a lot, and it means a lot in this book, because these are spiritual truths. They're not just a promise. It's a spiritual truth that if you do certain things, then these things will come true for you. The paragraph which some people miss right after where the promises are listed, it says, are these promises extravagant? We think not. They are being achieved among us. Some slowly, some more quickly. But it says they will always materialize if you're willing to work for them. And I think that's where the problem comes. A lot of times we're very spiritually lazy people, and we don't want to be willing to work for that promise to come true in our life. Because that working means that we're going to have to give up some of our old ideas and attitudes on a lot of this. I had to begin to do some different things in my life for these promises to take place. I can tell you there were certain things that I could promise you about. If you continue to do what you've always done, I promise you, you'll get what you've always got. Only it'll be worse. It'll be worse. You know, they say, you know, things can get better or things can get worse. Well, if you don't do it, things will get worse. Trust me on that. Because if you're like me, every time you make that mistake again and again, you have a tendency to beat yourself more and more and more. And you go down. So I'm going to try to share with you today some of the promises and how they have come true in my life. Promise number 1 is we're going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. Now, freedom is not what I used to think it was. Back in the 60s and 70s, I thought freedom was if it feels good, do it. Now, on your page here, it's the ones on page 83 and 84 on your handout. We're going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. Like I say, I grew up in this, if it feels good, do it. Well, that's not real freedom. I mean, that's sort of infringing yourself on other people, you know. I had to learn that if it feels good and it doesn't hurt anybody else, especially me, then I might consider it. You know, I've had to learn to modify that viewpoint. But if you continue on in that type of thought, if it feels good, do it, it's sort of like going to sleep with dogs. Ultimately, you're going to wake up with fleas. You know, things are going to happen. You know, you can't just do everything you feel, because remember, feelings aren't facts. Feelings are very changeable. And that's like when my husband would say to me, you know, just tell me what I need to do to make you happy. Well, let's see, what time is it today? Well, at 1:26, let's see, what would make me happy on a Saturday? You know, because at 1:27, it might be something different, because I didn't know what it was that I needed to make me happy, so I didn't have any idea what it was. But obedience to God's will is what brings me into the state of freedom and happiness. You know, it's like when I'm doing my own self-will, everything is pretty limited, and I'm doomed to failure. But when I am operating out of God's will, then I have a whole broad area of possibilities open to me. And part of that is, you know, it's like the closer I stay to my higher power, the more I'm able to experience freedom and happiness. Because then I'm not afraid of what you're going to say, and what you're going to think about me, what's going to happen over here, because I am staying close to God. And when I'm staying close to God, there's nothing going to happen to me that God can't take care of. And once I know that deep inside of me, then this promise begins to take a real meaning in my life. You know, and you think in terms of a wolf. A wolf doesn't, if you've got a bunch of sheep, a wolf does not bother the sheep that's with the flock. It goes on those that are over there doing their own thing. Those little sheep that are out there wandering around out by themselves, that's the ones that the wolves and the coyotes pick off, because they know they're vulnerable. And those that are close to the shepherd over here are the ones that are going to be protected the most, you know. So if I think on that in terms of if I'm doing what I need to be, if I'm staying close to God and my people, which is y'all, I'm going to be less likely to be out there in Waka Waka land and able to get hurt, you know. I'm not as vulnerable, let us say. Now, everybody would like to be successful and happy, and a lot of times I thought success was happiness. You know, happiness was when. Happiness is when I get, when I have, when you do. It was out there. It never occurred to me that happiness had to start from inside, and that happiness was a decision. You know? It's like, have a good day unless you've made other plans. Well, now, I have consciously woke up on days and decided to be miserable. I don't know about y'all, but when I get up and I make a conscious decision that, you know, oh, man, I don't want to get up, and I start that whine and attitude in my head, I have made myself a drag for the day. It's really that simple. I have to sometimes do some things I don't want to do. I have to make some changes if I'm going to find freedom and happiness. Like I'm going to have to change playgrounds and playmates. I used to think happiness was excitement and living on the edge. I still like excitement, but I find more positive excitement in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and Al-Anon, and I don't have to go to the bars and find it anymore. You know, I mean, there's a difference. I had to change where I go and what I do and who I associate with, and I cannot be around people who are negative, but for measured doses of time because I'm a joiner in. I don't know about you, but have you ever been around somebody that just sits there and bitches and complains and everything is woe and gloom, and what do you find yourself doing? God, yeah, I know what you're talking about. Let me tell you about mine. You know, I would go to meetings sometime and I would feel great. And I'd get in there and listen to some newcomer whining and pissing and moaning about stuff, you know, and I'd get there and I'd think, yeah, boy, I remember when J.D. did, how dare he do that? I'd go home and tell him, I'll slap shit out of you. Because I'm a joiner in, you know. I join in, and I join in on feelings, you know. We call it empathizing, you know. But the bottom line was there's a difference between sympathy and empathy and being well. There's a difference between all those things. And I found like there's certain people in my life that I had to take in measured doses, and my mother was one of them. Because my mother, nothing good ever happened to her. She'd call, and she'd start telling me what a terrible day she'd had and what all was going wrong. And I said, Mama, tell me something good happened today. And she'd say, don't be snotty. You know. She didn't know. And so what I had to do was a lot of times when Mama would call, I'd say, Mama, hang on. And I said, I got to go to the bathroom. And I'd lay the phone down, and I'd go to the bathroom, and I'd sit down on top of that commode seat, and I'd say, God, it's her again. And she's getting to me. And I need some positive reinforcement here because I couldn't be around her that long or even on the phone with her that long. And sometimes I'd just have to say, Mom, I'm sorry, I got something I got to do. And what I had to do was get off the phone. I didn't need to have to hurt her feelings and tell her, you know, you're really driving me nuts. But the bottom line was it's called self-protection. And I had the freedom to do that. You know, before I thought I was bound to have to be around people that I couldn't stand to be around. You know, it's like family functions. Aren't we coming up to a good time of year? God, don't we love holidays? We have a Thursday night meeting. People say, y'all meet on Thanksgiving. I said, yeah, we're so damn grateful there's a place to go when you've been with a family that... Man, if you can just live to get to your meeting and survive that holiday, I'm telling you, you know. And it used to feel that way, you know, and it can still happen that way. You know, sometimes you just hang on till you can get there for God's sake, you know. But we have the freedom to tell somebody that. Used to, I had the guilt feelings. If I told you how I felt about my mother, you'd think I was a bad person. And yet you can go into a meeting and you can tell somebody how you feel, and they know that that's a feeling, it's not a fact, and just because you have a bad feeling doesn't make you a bad person. So we have the freedom to share. There's a tremendous amount of freedom when someone gives you permission to share your feelings. Tremendous amount. Where is your God? You know, I used to keep God in a box. I don't know about y'all. Do you ever keep God in a box? That's where it's what you just allow Him to work in this area of your life, and I'll handle this one over here. I thank you. I know how to do my job. I don't need God on the job. Thank you very much. And then you get to work, and the person next to you does something that just drives you nuts, and then all of a sudden you realize you have to take God to work. Oh, what a bummer. You know, I took God with me on the highways, and y'all better be grateful. I could leave the house in a good mood. By the time I got to work, I was a raving-ass nut. You know there's people out there driving that don't need a license? Did you know that? And you know why they're out there? Because you're running late. You ever seen it fail? You're running late, and every slow turkey in the world pulls in front of you and squats, right? And did you know something? It's not them that's out of sync. It's you. If you had got up at the time you're supposed to get up and left when you would, you'd have missed them. They're always out there, same time. You're the one that's out of sync, you know. You're the one that's out of sync. And then you expect them to do something different. A little insanity there. It's called accepting life on life's terms, taking God out of that box and taking Him with you in every area of your life, not limiting God's power to only work here, there, and whatever. You know, my higher power is a real gentleman, and He doesn't go where He's not invited, you know. And I didn't realize that I could take Him and use Him in each and every. And the more that I began to use God, the more conscious I became of God working in my life, the more freedom I had, the more independence I had, and the happier I was, you know. Another thing about happiness, you can be right or you can be happy. See, I like being right. In order for me to be right, you know what that means? You got to be wrong. I'm even happier when you're wrong and you know it. And if you don't, I'll tell you about it. Isn't that stupid? But that's what I used to do. I used to go around and when I'd win the argument, think yes. And I didn't win nothing. You don't win in an argument, for God's sake. All they do is just shut up because they're tired of fighting. And I'll admit is I could just hang in there a long time. You know, I had stability, you know. I was consistent. I could consistently drive you nuts on any given thing, you know. I'd hang in because I know from experience if you hang in long enough, you get your way. I'd done it all my life. You scream and holler about it and whine about it long enough, everybody finally goes, I'd see little kids do that in airports. You ever notice that? They ought to ban kids from airports. And they always sit by me, behind me, or in front of me. I've never seen it fail. You know, the one that wants to scream for 5,000 miles, that's the one I get next to, you know. And all he's wanting is his way. That's all he's wanting is his way. And that was all I was wanting. But when I began to give up and do it a different way, by doing it the way that God would have me to do it, things began to be better in my life. It's just amazing. And some of the freedom I had was freedom from fears. Now, I don't know about you, but I was eat up with fear. I didn't know I was such a fearful person. I had no idea that my life ran on fear. I would have told you that I was not afraid of anything. You know, I'm a pretty big girl. I mean, you know, there's just not too much to be afraid of. But I didn't like being at home in the dark by myself. I didn't like flying for years. Didn't like flying. Scared to death of heights. You know, it's just not a pleasant thing to look at the Grand Canyon on your belly like a snake. You know, you drive all that distance, you get over there, and then you get out of the car and you crawl the last, 100 yards. And you look over and say, yeah, looks good, back up. That's pitiful. You're not free when you've got those kind of unnatural fears. There's no freedom in life to that. Do you realize there's a lot of things in God's world out there that you will never be able to enjoy if you are bound up in those kind of fears? And I didn't know that. I am not afraid of buttons and buzzers. I have the freedom to accept help from others. I used to couldn't do that. I couldn't accept your help because it made me feel less than to have to be dependent upon you. I was scared to death that there was something going to happen and you couldn't meet my needs. And there very well may be, but there's nothing that's going to happen that God can't, and God uses people. I call it God with skin on it. A lot of times God puts those people in my life to do for me the things that I need to have done that I can't do. A few years ago I had a heat stroke. And it was a real scary thing, you know. I was standing here talking like to a group of people, and all of a sudden, I don't know if you've ever put a jigsaw puzzle together, you know, all those little weird shaped pieces. That's the way people begin to look. They begin to just sort of separate into little weird shapes and things. It was real freaky. You're standing up here, you know, and you're trying to do something, and you go, oh, something is happening. Maybe it will go away. A little denial of reality. But as a result, I had a certain regimen that I had to adopt for my life if I was going to continue to live one. And part of that was I was going to have to go, and everything in my body had gone completely kapluck out of balance. And the doctor said that I would get more in balance, get all of my little electrolytes and crap done if I'd do some exercise. Well, I mean, that's sort of like the big E, you know, exercise. E. You know, thank you very much. This is it, man. I can do this. And he said, no. He said, I want you to get off that fat butt of yours, and I want you to walk. And he said, go over to the mall where there's air conditioning. He said, you can't do the heat. You'll never be able to do the heat anymore. And you just have to accept that. And I said, but wait a minute. I want to do that. He said, no, you're going to have to live first. And so all of a sudden I felt one of my freedoms leave me, I thought, because I didn't have the freedom to come and go and do as I pleased anymore because I had some limitations there. And not only that, I said, but how am I even going to get, if I can't do heat, how can I get to the mall? Because the air conditioner's out on my car. And he said, well, fix it. And I said, oh, I can't afford to do that. I said, the air conditioner's worth more than the car. And he said, well, why don't you ask somebody to take you? Novel idea. Because, see, I'm the person other people call and ask to help them. I am not the person who calls and asks other people to help me. You know, it's okay. And you know why? Because when you're the giver, you're in control. You're in control of who you give to, when you give to, how much you give to, when you don't. If you're the receiver, you're vulnerable because you're at that other person's whim. I don't like that. I like to be the giver. Thank you very much. And I had to go, and I told, and like I say, thank God I have a big sponsorship family. And so I said, your assignment is to take Mother to the mall. And they looked, and I said, no, in all seriousness, I just got them again. I said, I need some help with transportation to the mall to walk, and I'll walk and then come back home. I need the transportation back and forth. And I said, and like to the meetings, I said, because I can't afford to get the air conditioner fixed. They wanted $800 to fix the air conditioner on my car. And I said, that's just the reality here. I've got to do this deal. And they said, we are more than happy to help you, my God. You know, we wondered, you know, what can we do to help you? And then here it is, you know, and then here I've been depriving them of that. And did you know that made me feel more free than I've ever felt? Because now I have the freedom to say, I have a need that I can't take care of. Can you help me? And there's great freedom in being able to do that instead of having to do it for yourself all the time. Tremendous freedom there. Giving and receiving for free. For free. And not keeping score of what I give you, and not keeping score of what you give me. Learning to accept was one of the hardest things. To receive. And the thing of it is, I think, well, God, I really hate to call them because, you know, I know they've got a lot to do, and I know they've got, and I'd sit there and I'd think, and yeah, that's just what some people tell you when you're sponsoring them is, I didn't want to bother you because I knew you were busy, and you know you're sitting there and you're not that busy, you can do that deal. And so I had to put myself on the other side of that coin. And it was hard to do. You know, it bends your ego a little to have to do that when you can't be self-supporting totally like you'd like to be. And then, like I said, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? You know, it never occurred to me that that was a choice I was making. That's a choice. Happiness is a choice. I can decide to be or not to be. It's up to me. My great-grand sponsor told me that every morning when she gets up, she goes to her kitchen window and she looks out and she says these words, today's the day that God has made, and I'm going to make a decision right now to have a good day. I'm going to be happy today. And I thought, God, you know, you mean you just make a decision? I mean, you just do that? And see, I didn't realize that I had made those decisions sometimes. Like, for instance, when I'd open my eyes in the morning and I would look at Him and wonder what kind of day we were going to have. In that split second, I had turned my will and my life over to Him and what He did for the day. Not a higher power, but I had made Him a higher power because He was in control of how my day was going to be. And when I say that to myself out loud, this is the day that God has made, and I'm going to do the best I can, and I'm going to be as happy as I possibly can be today. And I hear myself say that. It makes a difference in your mind. Now, I did this one year at Christmas time. Christmas holidays were always bummers for me, especially during the active drinking, because you could always depend on extra jail terms and the Christmas money going to get him out of jail. And, you know, so I told him, get in jail today, see how quick you come out. I'm a little more well now. You know, try that again. But these were all choices that I made. But that morning I got up and I said to myself that it's Christmas holidays and they're usually hard times, and I have a lot of old memories that were hard to... Old tapes are really hard to get rid of. Took a number of years to be able to put some of those things back there and not bring them out and agonize them. The things that happened are still there, and I can share those things without bringing back the feelings and getting mad at Him again or feeling sorry for myself again. It's just like reading a history book. This is old history and this is what happened. Don't have any feeling about it today one way or the other. But that particular morning I got up and I said, I'm going to be happy today. It's in the damn holidays, but I'm going to be happy today. I'll tell you, I'm going to be happy today, and ain't nobody going to ruin my happiness today. And so that evening we had gone over to his mother's to take some Christmas presents. His mother had a real long driveway. Real long driveway. And J.D. was tired, and he had said to me, honey, why don't you drive tonight? So I was driving, and I was going down that long driveway, and I can go just zippy down that long driveway. Now, the problem is, I can zippy forward down that long driveway, but I don't zippy backward too well up that driveway. And it had been raining real hard for days. And the ground was soft. And his mom and dad wasn't home. And he said, well, we'll go and we'll come back later. And so that meant I was going to have to back up that long driveway. Well, I ain't going to tell him I can't back up that long driveway. I mean, he ought to know. He's been around me long enough. He ought to know I can't do that very well, but I'm going to give it a try. And naturally, I got off the driveway and sunk the axle right up, man, just in the mud. Just went right up in that yard, you know, and oh, shit. Now, you know, have you ever noticed how the other person acts like you did something to be proud about? I mean, like you're sitting there going, look what I did, you know. He looked at me and he said, that's the dumbest, stupidest thing I've ever seen. Who ever told you you could drive a car? Why in the hell do you have a license? And he went into all this terrible thing, you know, telling me how rotten a driver I was, and he called me everything but a human being. And I got out of the car, and I went around and I looked at that axle, and it was still in the mud. And I went back and I said, well, that didn't help at all. You want to try something useful like calling a wrecker now? Now, what I realized later was I was using a sense of humor with the situation. I didn't take everything he said to heart and think that I was bad and I wasn't a good person just because I made a mistake driving backwards, you know? I wasn't meant to drive backwards. What's behind me is not important. So, I mean, I've run over a few things in the back. Not a big deal. Don't get behind my car. What can I tell you? But the bottom line was I had made a decision to be happy that morning. And it didn't ruin my day. It didn't ruin my Christmas. It didn't ruin my night. We called the record. They came. They pulled the thing out. We told them Merry Christmas with a check, and we went on back home. You know, it wasn't that I was taking my grocery money to pay for the record. I wasn't. And we got home, and we were laughing about it. And he said, I never felt so stupid in my life. And you asked me, well, that didn't work. You want to do something that works, like call a record? And he said, why do you sit there and why do you beat yourself for something or someone else when that doesn't change the situation at all? Not at all. You don't know. Who knows? Number 2, will not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. Did you know that there's nothing in the world that I can do or have done that will stop God from loving me? Absolutely nothing. But the problems always lie within me as to why I do what I do. It's not your fault why I do what I do. A lot of times we like to blame you. But there's no hope if I blame you because I can't change anything you're doing. But if I can change what I'm doing, then there's hope for me. I don't have to be a victim. And I think that's one of the greatest things I learned in here is that we're victims. We're not victims, we are not victims. We volunteer. You know? We keep going back for that same thing time and time again. We volunteer for that crap. But after I did my 4th and 5th step and went through that, I found that had a tendency to remove a lot of that garbage from the past away. It separated me, and I saw that I may have done bad things, but I wasn't a bad person. When you're doing a 4th and 5th step, I think you do it to find out what's the truth. What is the truth about me? Because we have a tendency to minimize the things we should be looking at and maximize the bullshit that we shouldn't be caring that much about, you know? And I found out what was the good, what was the bad, what was the ugly, what was the this. But basically, I found out what was the truth about myself. Now, God will remove, in the 6th and 7th step, anything that you allow Him to remove that stands between you and the usefulness to your fellow man and to God. He'll do those things for you. And that is why that the past is an asset. We don't have to regret the past anymore. You know, I don't regret what I've done because it took everything I did to get me where I am here. You know, it's like I thought for a long time I'd sit in the rooms of Al-Anon and I'd say, God, I wish I'd have found this program while J.D. was still drinking. It wouldn't have made any difference. I wouldn't have done it. Because I wasn't through doing everything I was going to try to do. I never give up until I have done everything humanly possible. One of the girls I have has a shirt that says, every time I ever let go of anything, it had claw marks all over it. Yeah. And that's it, from hanging on, you know, from hanging on. And so when you share your past, it frees other people. That's the reason the past, not regret the past, nor wish to shut the door on it. Another thing, if I shut the door on the past, it's liable to repeat itself. That's where my experience comes from. In knowing what my past behavior, when you do this, this happens. When you don't do this, this happens. And if you have shut the door on that, you're going to have to learn that lesson again and again and again and again because you're trying to pretend it didn't happen. And I can remember sitting there thinking, surely I didn't do that. Surely to God, I didn't do that. No, you didn't do that. No, you thought it looked that way. It wasn't really that bad. No. No, not a big deal. And guess what? You find yourself doing it again down the road because you have changed all that, you have justified, you have rationalized it, but you haven't done anything to change it. So I have to look at the past. You know, it can be one of our greatest assets is your past because that's your experience. And what do we share best? Experience, strength, and hope. You know? It's sort of like my sponsor told me, she says, like looking in a rearview mirror in the car. She said you have to look up occasionally to make sure you're not being creamed, you know, from behind. You know, there's a purpose in looking in the rearview mirror to check where everything's okay. But if you look only in the rearview mirror, you run over what's right in front of you. So you use it as an occasional glance, just sort of as a touch base to check where am I right now, right here. Working step none is real dangerous. you know, when you're doing the old things you used to do. But see, by having the past, I know my pattern. And my pattern is a lot of times I discuss things with me. Now that's real scary, because when I discuss things with me, I don't have any other input than the nut. And what you hear in your head makes sense most of the time. You ever notice that? No matter how crazy it is, when it's up here, it makes sense. And see, I have a committee that comes in to visit, and we'll sit around and we'll have a little coffee clutch up there in my head, you know, and we'll discuss things. Now, see, knowing that about me, I know it's real important that I go and talk to someone and get that out of my head where I can hear what it really sounds like. Because up here, it's always good. But when you hear it, a lot of times you go, that is nuts. Absolutely nuts. But it made such good sense up here. Shutting the door on the past would be keeping those secrets behind closed doors again. And I was told I was only as sick as the secrets. You know, the things that you do are not as important as how you feel about you because of the things that you did. You know, a lot of things that I did were not that bad, but I felt really bad about me because I'd done them. And so that's another reason that you need to remember, and it helps keep a perspective. I think that's the main thing about that. It helps you to keep a perspective. And you don't have to go around thinking, this time it'll be different. Because if your past has taught you anything, it's taught you it's not going to be any different. We will comprehend the word serenity. Anybody know what to do with serenity when you had it? I tell you what, it was amazing to me when I'd get a little serenity going in our home. I was so used to chaos, so I'd have to create a disaster of some kind to keep that comfortability feeling going. Everything's in a mess, the situation normal, all screwed up, you know. True and enduring serenity is found at the point when one realizes and accepts its own limitations. That's when you're in I can't even talk. You're in a point of acceptance. When you can accept yourself and what's going on is just the way it needs to be right here, right now, and it won't be forever. Nothing is forever. It wasn't this way last 6 months ago, and it won't be this way 6 months. And my sponsor proved this to me one time. She had me to write down 10 things that were driving me nuts. And I said, just 10? Because, see, when everything's a big deal, nothing's a big deal. But everything was a big deal to me, you know. So I was always scattered, focusing on everything in general. And I wrote those 10 things down, and she gave it to me, and she said, now I'll take and put them in this envelope. And she said, I want you to put them in your ODAT book, like maybe 2 or 3 months further down. And she said, you don't look at it, but until you get there. And you know, when I got there, I opened up my envelope, and every one of those things were gone. None of those things were still the major disaster of the day, and I had 10 more to put in the little thing. You know, and I'd keep doing that for a while. But what that proved to me was that things change, situation change, and nothing is forever. And once you could accept that, it says, grant me the serenity to accept that things are just the way they are. You know, accept the reality of life. A lot of times we procrastinate and we try to get around that, you know. We don't want to do this deal. We don't want to be, and a lot of times serenity is just real uncomfortable. We have meetings every once in a while on serenity, how to stand it. You know, that'll be the meeting topic, you know. How do you stand serenity? How do you enjoy serenity enough not to screw it up? How can you do that? A lot of people are sitting around going, God, everything's so great in my life, I wonder when the next thing's going to happen. And you ruin your serenity right then by worrying about what's going to happen and how long it's going to last or what happens. You don't have to do it that way. Remember, though, true serenity is not freedom from the storm, but having peace in the middle of it. And I didn't understand that. I said, that doesn't make any sense at all. But I have had this, and I've experienced this in my life. I was in the middle of a tornado, and I was okay. I was just pissed off about getting wet. I didn't even realize the seriousness of the situation. I was in a state of peace. I wasn't terrified of the tornado anymore. Therefore, I could be in a storm and not automatically think tornado, you know. And the amazing thing was that when I was quivering in the closet, scared to death of the tornado, and when I was out in the car in the middle of the tornado, not afraid, God was both places. It didn't make any difference where I was. God was taking care of me. And I was the one that was putting the nerving fit on myself. You know, I've always terrified myself by feeding my fears. You know, have you ever noticed how fears are real social? They don't like to be alone. Have you ever been just afraid of one thing? One fear calls to another fear calls to another fear. You get a whole gang of fears going, you know. That's what it does for me, is I get all these fears. You know, it's like when J.D. had cancer. J.D. had been sober, and all of a sudden we noticed that there was this thing on his head that had begun to grow, and he was afraid to go get it seen about because all the men in his family had died of cancer and before they were 60, and so he was terrified. And true enough, if you've got a history of cancer, there is a high probability that you'll have cancer. And so anyway, he finally went to the doctor, and the doctor told him the minute he looked at it that he said, boy, you got a malignancy there. That's real nice, you know. They don't even have to do anything and just look at you and tell. And we got real scared, you know, And we wouldn't talk about it. Because, see, that's what we do when we get scared, is we don't have a tendency to talk. Because, see, if you talk, it makes it more real. And you don't want it to be, so therefore you don't talk about it. Maybe it'll go away if you just don't talk about it. Unfortunately, it didn't go away. But anyway, I got real terrified about it, and I couldn't talk to him about it, and I wanted to scream at him, I'm real mad at you for having this, because I'm afraid you're going to die. And I knew that he didn't need to hear, I'm afraid you're going to die, because he had enough of that himself. So one of the girls in the group called me that night, and I wasn't telling anybody about it. I'd mentioned it to my sponsor, but I wasn't telling anybody else. And that was that secret. That was that secret I was holding inside of me, and it was robbing me of all my peace. And she said, what's the matter with you? And I said, I don't know. I said, I can't talk about it. And so she got off the phone and she called everybody in the group. Back then there was about 12 or 15 of us. And she said, there's something wrong with Murph. Let's all pray for her. Now, I can't tell you what happened that night, but somewhere between midnight and 3 o'clock in the morning, I had peace and serenity come over me. The kind you can't understand, because, see, nothing had changed. There wasn't any need for peace to be there, but it was a knowing on the inside that everything was going to be okay. You don't know how it's going to work out, but you just know it's going to be okay no matter what happens. And that was serenity for me. That was one of the first times I experienced it. Serenity is when also I don't have to fight with someone and I can allow them to be miserable without me being miserable. You know, used to I thought that if I loved you and cared about you, if you were having a bad day, I had one with you. You know, I mean, that was called love, you know. And J.D. did it to me first. I didn't like it when it's done to me, but it was a lot of fun doing it back. I got up one morning, I was griping and carrying on and what have you, and J.D. said to me, you know, he said, I'm sorry you're having a bad day, but I'm going to have a good one anyway. I feel real peaceful. Bye. That made me worse, you know, because I thought, if you loved me, you'd feel miserable with me. And so a few days after that, we got up one morning, and J.D. was pissing and moaning, and I said, I'm in a state of serenity. I said, I'm sorry you're having a bad day, but I'm going to have a good one. And he just looked at me and I said, payback's a mother, ain't it? I tell you, I love it. But the thing about it is, in all truth, serenity for me is when you can be upset and I can recognize that you're upset and know that I'm powerless over it, and the best thing I can do for you is pray for you and then let God take care of it. And then I don't have to carry it as my burden on my heart anymore, because it doesn't do me any good to carry it because I can't do anything with it. Now, if carrying somebody else's problems and feelings help them, I'd say, let's do it. Let's do it. But it doesn't help them. And so I try not to do that anymore. And as a result, I have more serenity. It says, we will know peace. Now, peace is not normally achieved by frantic activity. I thought it was. Peace of mind always eluded me because I was always full of tension. I'm the kind of person, when the doctor asked me, he says, is there any kind of stress you're under? I said, no! Just a little uptight, you know. And he says, well, there's something that's elevating your blood pressure, you know. I mean, I was like a wire about to snap all the time. I was wrapped so tight. I was intense about everything. I never felt anything a little bit. I never was a little bit uncomfortable about anything. I was major whatever. I never dealt in terms of normalcy. I was always exaggerated. And did you know, even your health, your health cannot be gained by concentrating on your body. Did you know that? Hypochondriacs do it all the time. They concentrate on every little heartbeat. Did my heart beat 3 times that second, or was it 25? You know, I have one that'll say, I know I'm going to go into a panic attack tonight. I mean, she's into panic attack predicting. I guess it's all like the Richter scale, you know. She says, I'll lay down that bed and then my heart will go 100 miles an hour and it'll feel like it's jumping out of my chest. And I said, well, call me. And so she called me and she says, my heart's going 100 miles an hour, it's being out of my chest. I said, you're going to live. Hung up. And And she told me later, she said, that was cruel. That was really cruel. And I said, you lived, didn't you? And she said, yeah, but I didn't. I said, I told you. You were going to live. I gave you permission to live. That's all you needed. You know. She said, I won't call you next time in one of those. I'll tell you that. And I said, good. Because I said, there's nothing I can do about it. But you know, the funny thing about it is she will call and she'll say, it's starting to do that again. And I'll say, well, it's not going to kill you. You're not going to die from it. I said, you've had it checked over and over and over. You're pushing yourself into it. Now tell me what's going on. And you know, the funny thing is by the time she gets through telling me what's going on, she doesn't have the panic attack. You know, wish she can have a little peace. I think my addiction to excitement kept me from experiencing peace. I didn't know how to accept peace or serenity, either one. I didn't know how to do that. I was always being controlled by something else, and I was so intense about things. And I would say I'd taken the third step, but then my actions would tell you I had not taken the third step. I'd let go and let God. You know, you don't act and do the things that I did when you were in a state of peace. You just couldn't. And I can tell you one of the basic reasons. A person who is not at peace will not allow anybody else to have any either. Misery loves company. Have you ever noticed there's people that come around you and they'll tell you how wonderful and how peaceful everything is, but they're constantly stirring up shit like, did you know so-and-so said this about you? Did you know this was over here about you? That person's not at peace within themselves, because if they are, they don't find it necessary to have to do those things. So that's neat. God is the only consistent thing in my life. And when I am close to God, I have the peace. I can be alone and be okay. I can be peaceful at home. Used to, I had to have the TV going. I had to have the radio on. I had to have some kind of be on the telephone. I couldn't be alone. Because if I was alone with me. And I was alone with all that crap in my head that drove me nuts. So I did things to keep that crap, it was louder than, so that I didn't have to focus on it. When I got the crap out, in doing steps 4, 5, 6, and 7, and taking care of it in 8 and 9, I could lay down and I didn't have to do that. I could be at peace. And I also found out that when I found God, I found me. And I could be at peace with me, because I could talk to God and I could be at peace. I didn't have to worry anymore. I used to think it was your duty to worry about people. And I think I learned that. My mother would say, I'm worried about you, that means I love you. And I didn't, and then so Mother would call me and tell me something terrible, and I'd say, okay. And she'd say, well, aren't you worried about me? And I'd say, no. She'd say, you don't love me. I'd say, yes, I do, but there's nothing I can do about it. I said, worry does not have a positive effect upon me. Worry only weakens my prayers. I said, if I'm going to pray about it and then have to worry about it, obviously I need another higher power. Mine ain't good enough. Because if I've given it to Him, I ought to be able to leave it alone with Him, if I trust Him. So the problem is never that. It's always me. When I have inner peace, my circumstances are not important. I can put a God bubble around me. Do y'all know about God bubbles? When I'm going into situations that I feel a little fearful or what have you about, I ask God to put a bubble of protection around me. And that let those things, those harmful things that other people would say, hit that and bounce off and not have to penetrate my heart and not have to hurt me. And on the other hand, also let anything that I'd have a tendency to do to retaliate bounce off that and come back so that I don't hurt anybody else either. And I did that for years, going around my mother and certain people that I had a tendency to have negative reactions to when I was around them. Or if you're in a fearful situation of any kind, you can ask God to put that bubble of protection, and that'll give you a lot of peace. No matter how far down the scale we have gone, we'll see how our experience can benefit others. Well, we're talking about the past, but see, the difference between the past and experience is that we have learned from going through the past. Experience is the wisdom that you have to share. I've done this and this is what worked. That's my experience. I've done this and this didn't work. That was my experience. Maybe your experience may be different, but mine is mine. It's uniquely mine because nobody else has lived every day of their life like I have, and be grateful. Experience is what bridges the gap between us. And the reason I say that, I went for a long time to Al-Anon meetings, and I heard in the early years in the meetings there was a lot of griping and complaining about the alcoholic. I'll be honest about it, there was. And thank God we don't do that in our group. We focus on solutions, not problems. But I can remember, like I say, going to those meetings, and I hear these women talking about how mean the alcoholic was to them. What a terrible thing that he did. How he did this, how he did that. And I'm thinking in the back of my mind, well, You know, and especially when they'd come in and say their alcoholic hit them. You know, they come in with the blue bruises or whatever, and they'd say, well, he was drunk and he did this or that or whatever. And I'd begin to feel a little uncomfortable. Because, see, nobody was talking about beating up alcoholics. And I felt a lot of shame about that. There was a program on NBC one time, and it talked about abuse. It talked about sexual abuse. It talked about emotional abuse. It talked about husband beaters. Husband beaters. I identified with that segment. It talked about wife beaters, but the part that got me was that husband beater, because, see, I thought it was okay to do that. I thought it was okay when somebody hurt you to hurt them back, and they had a label for it, and that made me feel a lot of guilt. And then all of a sudden, one night in the meeting, I heard this old woman talking, and she said, you know, when he'd come home drunk and pass out in the middle of the floor, I'd take a baseball bat and I'd work his ass over. And I thought, I like her. But what she did when she shared that experience was she gave me permission to take the secret out of the closet and share it where it didn't have to eat my lunch anymore. And I found that no one appreciates abuse on men better than a group of Al-Anons. I mean, no one appreciates that as much. You know, it was amazing to me. It was just amazing to me that I could take that stuff out. And when people say we understand, they meant it. We understand because we've been there. We've had that experience too. There's that shared experience. And we can tell people, you know, I felt that way too. But I don't have to feel that way today. I have a choice. And then they're interested and they want to know. So that's the best thing about the experience. No matter what you've done, no matter how far you've gone down, there's somebody else who has done that. And I was told by a girl one time, she said, you know, you haven't done one thing I haven't done or wanted to do. And with her belief system that she had, wanting to do it made you just as guilty as if you did it. She felt no more guilt than I did for having done it just by her wanting to do it. And I said, well, that may be true, but the court looks at it a little different. And she said, jail was not a location. It was a state of mind. She said, you know, and I found that to be because I've known people who have been in prison for a number of years, and they said they were just as free in prison as they have ever been on the street because they were free in their heart and soul, that they had worked through their problems. So the walls of a prison, walls do not a prison make. It's an attitude. It's an attitude, and I had those bars and those walls up around myself to protect me because I was scared to death that you were going to find out what I had done, that you were going to find out that I had physically abused my husband, that you'd find out that I had been to jail, that you would find out I hated my mother. I had all those secrets that I was so afraid of. But those were the things, when I began to share those things, I found you had those same kind of feelings too. Whether you'd acted them out, you had still thought them and felt them. You know, it's real funny. You know, I dreamed about killing J.D. for a long time. I never planned his funeral. I guess I knew I wasn't going to bury him. I don't guess. I guess I just, you know, throw him in a browning bag, you know, save him for supper. I don't know. But, I'd hear so many women in the meeting talking about how they planned his funeral and they knew what they were going to wear, and they'd go past the coffin and they'd have this dialogue and they'd go, ha, 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 and stuff like that. And I'm thinking, how sick. They're just planning the funeral, you know. Me, I plan to kill him. I don't plan no funeral. I mean, you know, dispose the body and go on. But that was my experience. But I could relate to those feelings of frustration that get you to that point that you want out of a situation. And the funny thing about this is, those experiences in our lives, when we let God use them, become that mysterious preparation for the work He's going to do with you. Everything that's happened to you has happened so that you can take that experience and help someone else. It is the most amazing thing. You know, that's just like the girls that have been pregnant and had the abortions. When they share that, that gives the other girls who have felt so much guilt about that the freedom to share that. Or the guy who's had children and walked away and never saw them again. When they share that, that gives the person who has that guilt feeling the freedom to share that. It's a wonderful thing. Because you identify with people, and that takes away the aloneness. You know, we all feel so isolated. We all feel so alone on the inside. And when we begin to share those feelings, we find out that we are not alone. And that in God's hands, our past becomes one of our greatest assets. I just love that. You know, one time I was talking in Bellevue, Nebraska, and I was doing a weekend on the steps. and I was sharing about the planning of an affair that I had had in my mind, and this was after being in the program about 4 or 5 years, that I had this idea that I was getting old and that this guy was attractive, and I began to justify and rationalize all that same kind of thinking I had done years and years before that I thought I was immune to because I was in the program, and how much guilt I felt about that, and how when I'd call my sponsor, I'd tell her there's something I need for you to pray for me about, but I wouldn't tell her what it was, and how the feeling didn't go away until I identified it, named it, and claimed it, and told her what it was. And then she asked me just to pray and ask God to relieve me the need to do that, to take that need for me to do that away before I ruined my marriage. Because, I mean, this was the man that I never screwed around on in all of our years together, and then here sober and me in a program and we're contemplating something, you know? It's real sick. Just shows you that you can be in the program and be sick and do sick things. Just because you're here doesn't mean you turn instantly well overnight. And I had gotten sort of cocky in the program, and, you know, I've got this thing whipped and I know how to do this thing, and oh my God, here's an old behavior from the past coming up to haunt me. And I thought to myself, why am I sharing this on a tape my husband might hear? Not good, not good. And then I went on to tell him that I didn't have to act on that because God removed from me the need to have to do that. And I went all the way through that little deal, and I kept thinking it's one of those that once you get started, you know, you can't stop till you take it through, and you're going, I wish I hadn't ever brought this one up, and it's on tape. I can't believe I'm doing this. There was a girl that came up to me afterwards, and she said, I'm so glad you talked about that. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, that she had a flair for her minister who was doing some counseling with her, and that she was attracted to him, and she had been having those same kind of thoughts, and she said that he didn't seem to be getting away from that either, and she said, I have a feeling that we're going to be acting on that, but I don't think I'm going to have to now, because I know what to do. I've got to tell somebody. And she said, I've been in the program a long time, and I was ashamed to have to tell somebody I was having these kind of feelings after being in the program a long time. And so then I knew why I'd had to share what I shared that weekend. So God took that past of mine and put it to some use for her, and it really helped me. And that's like all that crud from the past about my mother. That has been some of the greatest tools in sharing with other people to help them to work through those things with their parents. Okay, that feeling of uselessness and self-pity will disappear. You ever thought about it? Self-pity is such a respectable defect of character. It's so logical and it's so convincing, and your suffering can be just so terrible and you can just wallow in it. It can bring you gloom and doom and despair. It can make you sick, you know. You can get depressed. You can get suicidal. Self-pity is the only prison that binds your soul. Do you know that? And it is a soul sickness, and it's one of the hardest things to get rid of. It is absolutely one of the most difficult defects because we get such mileage out of feeling sorry for ourselves. And people I sponsor that come to me with that self-pity, you know, and they say, you don't have any pity for me at all. You don't have any compassion. And I say, honey, you're doing such a good job for yourself, ain't nothing I can do come anywhere close to touching that. You're doing it for yourself, and you're doing such a good job, you know. But dissatisfaction, the things that make us feel sorry for ourselves, why do we do that? I think a lot of times we feel sorry for ourselves because we have a distorted view of what other people are doing and their happiness, and we see ourselves as not having what we think we ought to have or what we want. And that's because we have a tendency to judge other people. We look at their outsides and judge them by our insides. And if their outsides don't feel like our insides, then we feel sorry for us. How come I'm the only one that has to have? How come Chris can eat everything she wants and be skinny? How can she do that? Why can't I eat everything that she eats? God, when I eat that Brahms, I just might as well rub it on my butt to start with. You know. You know, why does that happen? God, that's sad, ain't it? That is sad. You mean, how long do I have to be on this diet? The rest of your life. That's not fair. You know, that's some of that crap self-pity. And we judge our conditions, and what happens to me is every time I make comparison or start judging me against you, I'm screwed up. Because I never come out equal to anybody. You're either better than or you're less than. When have you ever judged anything and come out equal to? Why, I'm just like that person. You never say that. You say that to your spouse. You're just like your mother. You're just like your ratty brother. You know, and when people judge you like that, do they ever judge you against something good? Honey, you're just like Liz Taylor. You're gorgeous. You're a diamond in the rough. No, they don't say stuff like that to me. You know. But what happens in that judging is that it isolates you because it makes you different. It makes you different. It makes you feel sorry for yourself. You know, years may wrinkle your skin, but enthusiasm and loss of joy wrinkles your soul. You know, you just get it on the inside when you do all that. That self-pity is a real good friend of worry and distrust and fear and despair. And all those things just crush your spirit. And then, you know, you get to the point where there's just no point in trying. I'll fail. I know I will. I've always failed. No need in trying that again. I'm just a failure. And then there's they're afraid of success. Well, if I do it, nobody will like me. The martyrs, God, I love them. You know, you ever think about the word martyrdom? To martyr is dumb. Tells you right so in the word, you know. I study words, you know. I'm big on words. I like that. But it's your attitude is what guarantees you failure or success. You know, a lot of things that I have failed at have been my biggest successes because I learned not to do it. And let me tell you, if you can learn what not to do in this life, you've done good. Let me tell you, it's not well what to do, it's what not to do. You know, it's like, oh God, it hurts when I do that. Well, don't do that. What a concept. What a concept. There's another thing too. On that fear of failure and fear of success, I have one that she says, well, I'm afraid to try because then if I don't make it, I say, oh God, yes. I said, let's just stay a victim forever. God, you wear those little victim shoes so well. You know, she just walks around, beat me, kick me, hurt me, tell me I'm cheap. I love it. And you know what people do? They walk around on her, tell her that she's cheap and that she should love it. That's what they do. You get what you ask for. You know, if you go around and when somebody calls you a chair, if you don't fold up, you don't have to be a chair. You know. I can call you an idiot. Does that make you an idiot? No. That's just my opinion. You know, and it tells us in our program that, you know, our opinions, that take what you want and leave the rest. So many times you hear people talk about the program and they say, take what you want and leave the rest. That's not what it says. It says, our opinions expressed here are those of the person who expressed them. Take what you want and leave the rest. It doesn't say take the program, take what you want and leave the rest. You know, that's those little things where we take stuff out of context. Now I learned opinions are like acids. Everybody's got one. They all stink. So I listen to those opinions. And you know, the thing is, I've been known to change an opinion. If you haven't changed an opinion or an idea, you might ought to check your pulse. You may be dead. Because the longer I live and the older I get and the more experiences I have, the more I learn that some of those people were right. And that I didn't know everything. So you have to learn to be content. Learn to be content wherever you are and whatever the circumstances are. It gives a purpose to your life. It gives one to mine. When you can become of use to your God and your fellow man, you know, it never occurred to me. There were certain things I always wanted to do in my life. You know, I married a military man because I wanted to travel. I got rid of him, married a drunk. Now I travel more than I've ever traveled in my life. So I would never thought it would come that way, you know. But I practice being content where I'm at. If I'm here in Altus, Oklahoma, I better be content in Altus, Oklahoma, because if I'm not content here, I'm not going to be content when I get home. You know, I've got to learn it's a one day at a time thing, and I have to be happy where I'm at. I have to be content. And when I'm doing what God would have me do one day at a time, I don't have time for self-pity. I just don't have time for self-pity. Because what good does it do? Now, you know, I'm not going to tell you that when I find that I have physical limitations, or when I got sick, or when I had that stroke, or you know, back when I hurt my back this year, I have a herniated disc. It's not nice, and yeah, you do feel sorry for yourself a little. You know, it hurts when you're in pain. It hurts. You know, and you go, no, and it's just like he asked me, could I do cartwheels? I said, yes, I can, but I choose not to do that today. Because then I don't want to hurt myself. See, I've learned to value myself, and I've learned to accept my limitations. And when I do that, I realize that a limitation, God doesn't close a door, He doesn't open a window, and that there will be some positive things come even of my limitations. You know, I used to watch my mother-in-law. She was illiterate. And we'd go to the grocery store, and the only time she needed my help at the grocery store is if she was going down the soup counter. Because soup labels all are the same. Everything else had a picture on it. She didn't have to worry about being able to read or write. But did you know something? She had the best memory I have ever seen in my life. Where she had a limitation, God gave her something to overcome. You know, and I think that happens with all of us. No matter what our limitations are, God gives us something. And, you know, it's through some of these limitations, like little Itchy, you know, she's got a blind son. He was run over by an upstruck when he was 5 years old. And he had to have 20-something surgeries on his brain and what have you. And he has some physical limitations in addition to being blind, you know. And when I watch him go around and his attitude and what have you, and we don't treat him like a blind kid. We treat him like a normal kid. And you know something? He responds like a normal kid. You know he's going to regular college, and he is a sophomore, and he's making good grades. And it's because we don't put limitations on Him. We allow Him to assess where His limitations are, and we don't do it for Him. And you know, there was a time in my life when I wanted to help people and to keep them from having to stretch themselves and be good to them, be kind to them. If we'd have done that with Brent, if Teresa had done that with Brent, he would be a cripple today. But he's not a cripple today. He goes walking. He gets out there and goes walking. He goes to track meets. Now that's something to behold. You know, have you ever been to a track meet and see a bunch of blind kids running the 50-yard dash? Just keeping them in their lane's a trip. They have a little string. And they hang on to that little string, and they go down. I think, God, if you go too fast, you get string burns on your finger. I mean, you know, see, my mind thinks like that. You know, he's just out there, man, I want to tear it up, you know. But he wins lots of little things like that, you know. It's been neat. It's been neat to be around people like that. We will lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows. In order to establish true trust with our fellow man, we must learn to love and accept them as they are, not as we want them to be. We need to accept them where they are without compromising our own standards. And we need to do that for ourselves. That means that we may demonstrate our support by affirming a friend's right to make his own decision and the choices, even though we may disagree with them. You know, you have the right to make your choice even though I think it's the wrong one. And I'm going to love you enough to give you the freedom to do that. I don't co-sign bull. I allow them to make their mistakes and love them anyway, even though they're making it. I've got one right now that I'm sponsoring, and she's in a relationship that was one of those, you know, we met one week and we were madly in love the next. And he's like, you know, 2 or 3 months sober. Yeah, and then here I'll go, oh, you know, another, you know, it's like a jitterhouse romance, but, and you know, outwardly it doesn't look like there's a chance in hell of that deal working, but I have to give her the right to do that deal. You know, I've told her what statistically we know, and you can share your experience about it, and the bottom line is she's going to have to do what she's going to have to do. And I know, see, the thing of it is, I know there's nothing that'll happen to her that God can't fix. And that's the reason you can let go of that. But each day is a gift from my higher power. The gift of life is personally mine today. I can choose to enjoy it or destroy it, whatever I want to do for any given day. Selfish, the disease of mine. I want it all for me. That's what selfish is to me. And the genuine caring about another person and giving them the freedom to make the choices that I have to make. You know, the greatest love I can give for another person is to accept them just as they are. And that's the kind of love I found in these rooms. I did not find that outside. I'm sure it was there, but I couldn't see it. You know, that's just like, you know, people say, well, I found it this and that and what have you. You know, I said, you know, I didn't find my God in a church. That doesn't mean that God's not there. Frankly, I think God's where the people are, regardless of where the people are. And if the church building is empty, I don't think God's worrying about being there. You know, I think He's out with where the people are, because my God lives inside of me and your God lives inside of you. And when I touch you, it's our God's touching. That's how I feel about it. But that's my feeling. Yours may be different. And I give you the right to do that in your way, in your shape and form. I get a high when I see growth in people. I tell you what, when you go from, like say, if I see you one year and then I see you the next year, and if there's a light come on in your eyes, or you can really tell that you're enjoying life and what God has to offer, that's a high for me. How in the world could we not say we have excitement in these rooms? I can, you know, when I see those people come in and they look dead, and they feel worse than dead, you know. Some of them, when they come into Al-Anon, are really grim looking. I'm not kidding you. You know, they're precious and pitiful, you know. Oh, yeah, man, they are precious and pitiful. And after a while, when you see them begin to change, you know, like I was telling you about that girl that's sitting on the bench, and then she got to the table, and then she began to share. You know, she told her story from the podium not too long ago. It's not the same girl. And you know what she was sharing? She said that she didn't know anybody's names for a long time, but she knew what kind of shoes you wore. Because she never looked her head up. When she looked around the room, she looked at everybody's feet, because she was scared to death that you were going to look at her and see that she was so bad that you wouldn't want anything to do with her. And at home, I wear my sneakers all the time. And I like to do things different. And my sneakers at home have different colored shoelaces. And people say, well, why have you, one of them got a glow-in-the-dark shoelace that's, you know, green, and this one over here is purple and has Shamu the whale on it. I said, why do you do that? And I said, so I can tell my left foot from my right. Why do you do it? Always had trouble with that. I can admit it. I said, it's easy to know which one goes on which one. I said, those shoes are the same color, they look alike, and so therefore you make them look different, and then you know exactly where they go. And they think you're joking, you know, that's okay. But she looked at me and she said, she's the one that has them weird shoes, you know. And I said, that's right. And she said, for a long time, that was how she knew. She said, this one wears this kind of shoes. And she said, that one wears those little pointy toe, looks like witch's shoes. And this one, and you know, she knows people's feet. I'd never even noticed what people had on their feet, but that's all she's looking at. To see that girl today and to see her look you dead in the eye, and when she opens her mouth to share in a meeting, there's good stuff coming out of it, because she's not one of those that shares bullshit. When she shares from the heart. She doesn't share, like, say, every meeting or anything like that, but when she decides to say something, it goes right to your heart. And I'd rather hear Cindy share as anybody I know. And that couldn't happen. That couldn't happen for the way she was. And we asked her one time, so what would you have done if we'd have ran over there and grabbed a hold of you and hugged you and told you, you know, instead of letting you run out before the meeting was over? She said, I'd never come back. Because she said, I was so afraid of people. She said it was all she could do to get out of her house. She was one of those that was almost to the point where she couldn't leave her house anymore. And she said, I had to get there because she said, I figured if I came early, somebody might talk to me. And she said, I couldn't stand the thought of somebody talking to me. So, but that is just, to me, like I say, it's wonderful when you see that and you realize that that's her gift. She's got a tremendous gift. People coming in today have no idea of what a miracle she is sitting in that chair. That's just like my oldest pigeon. Linda, for the first 3 years, said, my name's Linda and I pass. She was scared to death of people. Scared to death. She tried to hide under her ashtray. If she could have gotten under the ashtray, she would have been there. And she wore long hair and combed it over. She looked like a sheepdog because she was hiding. She was hiding behind all that hair. She didn't want to get out and she was scared. And then all of a sudden one night in the meeting, all of a sudden Linda opened her mouth and shared. And I just sat there and cried. We got another girl in our group, and her name is Freezy. So when she was a little kid, that her grandmother used to tell her hands was always cold and freezy, so they named her Freezy. And she's a beautiful, beautiful woman. She could go on a fashion page any day of the world, but see, Freezy couldn't read, and she was ashamed. She was afraid. Well, we got talking, Freezy, and we told her, we said, you know, in here we don't care other than the fact we want, it'd be easier for you to learn if you can read, and can you get a tutor, and can we help you? And you know something? At our meetings, we read Understanding Ourselves, which is one of our pamphlets, sort of like it's comparable to how it works in AA. And one night we were in there and somebody said, Freezy, will you read Understanding Ourselves? And Freezy read Understanding Ourselves. And the whole group cried. Because we knew how many years it had taken her to get to the point where she could read. She's dyslexic. And they had told her in school she was stupid. And she left school because she didn't know she had a disease. And see, that's some of the miracles. And how in the world I could have missed all that because I'd have been sitting there in those meetings saying, why don't they get somebody that can read instead of somebody that stumbles over that? Nobody ever read it any better with more feeling than that girl read. And yeah, she made some mistakes. Who gave her care? Who cared? You know, that's that getting that high. You know, to get rid of that feeling on the inside that what you want and how you want it, to get out of self just a little bit. I tell you what we're going to do. Let's take a little break now so Chris can have another Coke. She told me, she said, I've got to have a self-seeking will slip away. Now, like I say, I like words. There's a difference between selfish, self-centered, self-seeking. Selfish is, I want it all for me. That's real simple. Self-centered is, I figure it's all about me. You know, I'm so self-centered that I think everything you think or do, it has something to do with me. You know, I can remember, it was real funny, one of the first meetings in Al-Anon that I went to over at this 120.5 group, my sponsor's husband was speaking. I didn't know that was her husband that night because she wasn't my sponsor then. And here was this black man, bald-headed, and he was talking about things, and he said, you know, it's sort of like a fat woman trying to hide under a tent dress. And I said, you mean like a bald man wearing a hat? I was so self-centered, I thought he was saying something to me when he didn't even know I was there. And of course I had to retaliate, and he laughed and said, exactly. See, he was well, you know. I didn't know you weren't supposed to heckle from the audience, you know. You know, but what goes around comes around. One time I was talking at this AA meeting in Hot Springs, and it was around Christmas time, and this guy that came in, and it was evidently his first meeting, and he was feeling no pain. And bless his heart, anyway, I started talking a few minutes. He said, well, when am I going to get to talk? And so they got him set down, you know, in the chair, and he said, that woman is the darndest talking woman I believe I've ever heard in my life. She's got more to say than I ever wanted to hear. You know. And I thought about that night with Joe. Okay, so selfish is I want it all for me, and self-centered is figuring it's all about me, and self-seeking is what's in it for me. That helps me to differentiate the two, because, you know, the book talks a lot about the different kinds of self. What's in it for me? When we begin to lessen our acts of kindness and helpfulness because we think those who receive them do not properly appreciate what's being done for them, it's time to take a look at ourselves. See, that's what's in it for me. If what I'm doing for you is not getting me the result I want, then I'm doing it for me. That's that self-seeking. What's in it for me? What you sow, you'll reap. That doesn't mean you'll reap it from where you sow it. And see, that used to bother me a lot. If I spend a lot of time with you, working with you on a particular thing, you're supposed to get better. And it never occurred to me that I get better every time I have to tell you about it. Because what it does, it reconfirms within me what I believe. And it helps me to keep acting like what I believe. And a lot of time I put a lot of energy in over here, and I don't see any results. And it gets frustrating. And the bottom line is over here, this person may be getting it just by listening from over here all the time. So I found that a lot of times I shortchange myself in life because I look where I put it out over here and expect it back from there when I'm getting it from this over here, and I never give them credit for doing it over on this side. Now, I did this with my mother and my sister. All my life I looked at my mother and said, not good enough. She's not a good mother. She doesn't do the things. She's not a nurturing mother. She's not a loving mother. She's not a kind mother. She never has a kind word to say to me. All she does is tell me when I screw up what I've done wrong. And I want her to love me. So I go back over here and I keep working on this. I want her to tell me she loves me. I want her to show me she loves me. I want her to do something like I want her to do to let me know that she feels like I want her to feel. Now, damn it, I'm tired of this. You know, what's in it for me? I'm going over there getting that back. Now, what's happening all these years? My older sister, she's 15 years older than me. What is my sister doing? She's loving me. She's being supportive of me. She's encouraging me. She's doing all those things that I wanted from over here. And I miss it because it's not coming from the right person. Now, I benefited from all of that, but I never gave any credit to that. And I just took it for granted. I always do that. You know, I'm such a... You know, we're such self-centered people that we take all that kind of stuff for granted and think, well, I deserve that, you know. And it never occurred to me till I met some of y'all that that's not what sisters and brothers usually do for one another. That's what parents do for one another. And you see, that was where God was helping me because He knew what Mother was capable of. And He knew what Mother wasn't capable of. And so Mother was doing the best she could, but it wasn't what I felt like I wanted or needed. But God was giving me these things from another direction, so I missed it. Now, the same thing's true is if I do something good over here, I have no right to expect anything for what I do. Because expectations are premeditated resentments. When I do something expecting a result, what I've done is I've set you up for failure and me up for disappointment. Every time. Every time I do that. Because if I don't get back from you in the way I feel like I'm supposed to, then I get my feelings hurt. And I get resentful. And I get revengeful, too. So, I had to learn that it doesn't work that way. My job comes from giving unconditionally. No expectations. Giving for free. Because when you think about it, when you come into these rooms, what does it cost you to recover? Just be willing to give up self-will. That's all. Just your whole life. That's all. Nothing more than that. Just your whole life, you know. But the bottom line is it doesn't cost, you know, if you never put a penny in the pot when it goes around, then nobody gonna tell you you can't come here and recover. Doesn't cost you anything. You freely get the stuff because we freely share the experience. That's just like when I come to talk for here, you know. Several years ago I was talking down in Texas and the girls got carried away on their flyer. And they put on there, you know, there's a registration fee for the weekend and said make your checks payable to MERP, M-E-R-P. So everybody said, well, since when did you start charging to talk? And I said, I haven't started charging to talk. And they said, well, and they showed me one of those flyers, and I like to freak. I said, I can't believe that. And she said, well, we just thought it'd be simple. And I said, you thought it'd be simple? I said, I've never charged for anything I've done in this program. I said, the only thing when I come is that I ask that my transportation, my lodging, and my food be covered. I've never asked for anything other than that. And I said, and that's only because I don't have the money to do it. You know, I was taught a long time ago that if you, we pay our speakers and what have you their expenses to come because you never know. Yes, a lot of people can afford to go. For some people have got the funds that they can afford to go and do that. But then you're limiting the people who can't afford to go. That's just like the reason in our groups that we send our GRs to our district meetings and our area assemblies, because we don't ever want to be based on money. And we're self-supporting. We take care of our own, you know, that kind of thing. So freely I was given this program, and so I have a responsibility to freely give it back. There's a good exercise I have in the evenings, and it's called, have I helped one person today to feel better? Have I done anything? Am I at least a little wiser today, if nothing else? Did I try to make someone feel a little more cared for? Did I help someone to learn how to do just a little something better to make their life a little better? Then I haven't had a bad day. It's not what did I get today, but what did I give today? That keeps you out of that self-seeking stuff all the time. People who are self-seekers are people pleasers. Did you know that? The people pleaser, that's when I'm doing something to make you like me so that I get a benefit out of it. You see, I'm not doing it for free. I'm doing it in order to have you to like me. So that's self-seeking. And when I do that, I get resentment. I resent me for doing it. I resent you for having that much influence over me, that I should care what you think. See, it's not important what you think. What's important is what me and God know. That's the important things, and yet we will jump through ourselves for what somebody else may think. And I got a newsflash. People are going to think what they want to think. You really don't have that much to do with it. Because I have been a complete asshole, and people have liked me. And I have been completely wonderful, and people haven't liked me. So there. You know, I read a book one time, and this guy said that if you found 5 friends in an entire lifetime that would truly accept you as you are and love you in spite of it, that you had done something truly outstanding. And I thought, too bad he never got here. 5. What a short-changing thing. Because I have friends from all over the world. All over the world. Not just here in Altus, Oklahoma, or Vernon, Texas, or whatever. I've got friends from all over the world. I've got people that I write to from France and from England and from Italy and South Africa and Iceland and all over. Because why? Because we have something in common. It's called recovery through our program. That's all. If it wasn't for our program of recovery, I wouldn't know any of those people. It says people who would not normally socially mix, right? Let me tell you about that. I was sitting one time in Palm Springs, California, and in my room that night, in my hotel room, we were eating salsa like pigs. And there was a man and his wife from Sweden. There was a girl from Mexico. There was a black man and his Chinese wife. And there was a redneck girl from Arkansas. People who would not normally mix. And we were telling dirty jokes and eating salsa and having a wonderful time. Having a wonderful time. Another thing, when I do something and I'm not doing it for fun and for free, I'm doing it with strings. And the strings always get me bound up. They tie me up. That kind of giving gets me all screwed up on the inside, and I get to feeling less than, and then I don't like you, and then I don't like me, and it's just not worth it. Now the 9th one says our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. Well, God is in life-changing business. That's His business. But He's never chosen to violate my will. God never makes me do anything. Pain will, but God won't. We choose our own attitude and outlook. It's something that we get up and we do. And a lot of people say, well, I have a problem with depression. Well, depression is nothing but anger turned inward on you. That's all it amounts to. You get mad at you and you turn that inward. And that's a byproduct of dwelling on self-pity, too. Poor me. Don't use excuses for rotten attitudes. That's my nature. I can't help the way I am. Oh, I love that one, you know. I was born an asshole, I'll die an asshole. That's what that interprets out. You know, I am what I am. Only Popeye can do that and get away with it. Because that's self-deception. You're the way you choose to be. You don't have to be. And no matter how you were born, you don't have to be. You know, the thing about it is you can be poor in finances, but you don't have to be poor in character or poor in spirit. You know? That's a choice. That's a choice. And we were all created equal in that area. We all have that same ability to feel and be spiritual creatures. We are no different in that area. We are all created equal. When they do that self-deception stuff about I am the way I am and I can't help how I am, we got a guy in our group that is also a batterer. And just because he's not breaking bones today, he says, I've got progress, not perfection. And, you know, I look at that and I say to myself, you know, I don't think that I could stop with just mere progress on that deal when I'm still hurting people, when I'm still causing damage. And I have to remember that he may be doing it with a hand, but I can do it with my tongue. You know, that he's not the only one that has the ability to do that. Because some of the worst things, you know, it's like my husband tells me, he said, you know, he says, you got a real quick wit, but you got a real quick mouth with it. And that's true. And once it's sort of like cards. Once it's laid, it's played. And once you've got that, and when you've said that horrible, ugly, sarcastic thing, all the words in the world will not bring it back. When it's already hit that heart and done that damage, all the I'm sorry's in the world will not change those words that came. And don't you remember when someone has said something hateful and hurtful to you, that sometimes for years I have played that tape and felt that pain one more time. Now they say it to me one time, but I'll hear that tape a million times. So they've done it to me once. But I've done it to me a million times, and I have to forgive myself. I have to forgive myself for those quick things and those rotten attitudes. You know, it's also spiritual laziness on my part when I'm not willing to make those changes. When I'm unwilling to face my defects and name them and claim them and then allow God to remove them, I'm being very spiritually lazy and I'm being very self-centered. And I'm making a choice to stay in sickness instead of recovery. That's all that amounts to. People say, well, I'm not ready to get rid of this or that, and I'm not ready. You know, I'll give up. Let's see, what will I give up? I'll give up axe murdering. That's a good place to start. Yeah. You know, the thing about it is, it's a lot of people like to escape in their minds with that kind of crap, but you know, that's a real soul sickness. And not only that, it's real sick to wallow in it, and you can die there if you're not real careful. And there's people that die in the rooms of Al-Anon and Alcoholics Anonymous strictly from the unwillingness to make the changes. And if you think they're not there, look around you. I mean, you can tell the people who are working a program that they're showing recovery and they're showing happiness, or you can go to the bitching corner. And there's always those that, you know, that have the absolute nervous breakdown when somebody moves a coffee pot from one side of the room to the other. That's the one always kills me. You know, it's a change. We can't handle that, you know. I'm dying over here, you know. Or the person that says, well, we can't smoke in this room, so by God, I'll go and I don't have to go to these meetings. No, you know, you can't wait an hour for a cigarette and you're going to make a choice to go out there and die, you know. You got to remember where your priorities are. And we're not here for a bunch of other causes. We're here to get well. And part of that process is learning to be a realist, and this is it. And you got to do the greatest good for the greatest number, and sometimes that's not what I want, because it's not what I like. But I have to remember there's more than me here. I've got to be willing to do that. So there's change in attitude. For me, it was a change from negative to positive. You know, I love the story about the two kids. One was the optimist and one was the pessimist, and they gave each one of them a choice of some toys and things, and they gave the little boy who was the pessimist, they gave him a room full of beautiful new toys. And they just said, they're all yours, and they turned him loose, and he just sat there and he looked at it, and he said, they'll all break. The batteries are going to run down. Probably won't let me take them home. And he sat there and he was miserable in his room of beautiful new toys. And that little boy that was the optimist, he had a better attitude. They put him in a room with horse manure and a shovel. And he looked at it, and man, he started laughing and giggling, and he was slinging that shit, throwing it from one side of the room to the other. And they said, what are you doing? He said, there's got to be a pony in here somewhere. You know, he chose to look at it in a different light. And I found, like, for me, there's what I call the black dog, white dog theory. And it's like inside of me there's a force that's negative and there's another one that's positive. And the negative one is the one that has all those resentments and all that self-pity and all that looking for you to hurt me and all that stuff. And then the other side is the God side. The black dog represents the bad and the white dog the good. And they're always in a war. Now who wins? Whatever dog you feed the most. So it's important for me to feed that white dog and to get that positive spiritual reinforcement that I get from going to my meetings so that I don't stay negative. Because, I normally wake up negative. And for me to live in a positive attitude and outlook is something I have to work at. That's the reason I think they call it trudge. They say we trudge the road of happy destiny. Trudge. Trudge does not indicate skip to Maloo. It does not indicate a happy little joyful every moment of the existence. It means there's going to be some work. Trudge sounds like work to me. And this program has been work. It's hard many times, but the thing about it is, the things that were given to me for nothing in this life, I never appreciated as much as the stuff I worked for, because I had a sense of accomplishment once I had done that. And that's like in the program. I thought the world should revolve around me and what I wanted, because you see, I was everything in my own little world. But now I realize that when it talks about in the book, I can learn to be one among many. I don't have to be the big dog. I can be one of the pack, and it's okay. The main thing, though, is, if you're behind the lead dog, the view's the same. But view don't change much. But in all seriousness, my attitude is a choice, and I choose to do something different, and that's called a little wisdom. That's what it talks about in the Serenity Prayer, the wisdom to know the difference. I know the difference now, and I know that I'm here to give, not to get, but I also know that when I give, I get. Because when I do God's will, I get everything I possibly need. Fear of people in economic insecurity will leave us. There's the big one. Wouldn't everybody love that? Yeah, I know, Derek, you're into this one. Fear of cars. Never to be afraid to trust your unknown future to a known higher power. Because the power behind you is always greater than the problem in front of you. If you can remember that, and if you can apply that, it really works. God's will can be a burden when we refuse to let it work in our lives and we try to fight it. Or it can be a power that carries us one day at a time through any circumstances. I don't have to have a great amount of faith. I just have to have faith in a great and powerful God. A lot of people say, well, you got more faith than I got. I don't know. I think everybody gets the same amount of faith. It's sort of like a muscle. If you exercise it, it gets stronger. And if you don't, it sits around, gets flabby, and lays there, That's the bottom line. You got to use it. But God will supplies all of our needs as long as we perform His work well. That's one of the promises they have in there. I can be happy, joyous, and free and shan't want for anything. So why should I worry about economic security? Why should I have to worry about that? I don't know. The IRS seems to be real concerned about it. And I used to, too. I used to be terrified of the IRS. You know why? Lied on my tax return. You'd be surprised when you quit lying on your tax return how you don't fear the IRS anymore. It's real amazing how that works, When you start paying your bills, you don't have to worry about people dunning you all the time. Can you remember when you hate for the door to knock and for the phone to ring because of somebody calling you, hassling you about something? I don't have to worry about that anymore. Except those siding calls. They irritate me. At mealtime, don't they know I'm a dog at my food bowl? I'll bite anything that disturbs me. But I didn't have to do that. And, I found out in doing a fourth and fifth step what the problem was with my economic insecurity. I'm an impulsive, compulsive spender. And when you don't have any balance in that area, you're always going to be in financial problem. I would be the kind that would work and scrimp and save to pay off this so you could buy that. Now, let's always have a loan at the bank. Let's don't ever have a time, Oh, plastic. My plastic was thin as OCD papers from using them, I had to learn to do without all that. I have one credit card now, and that credit card's for emergencies, like when I travel and stuff. You never know what may happen, but the bottom line is I don't have to abuse it like I used to do. And when I quit doing that, you'd be surprised how you don't have to worry about the bills. When the bills come in the mail, you can take care of them on a monthly basis, and you don't have to sit there in a panic all the time that something's going to happen. When I did my part, it's funny how all that started changing. And it wasn't J.D. that was doing it to us like I like to tell him he was. But I found that I used to think that the things that meant the most to me were my material possessions. Well, those are things that can be stolen. And those are things that can burn up. And those are things that can be taken away from you. But the true things of life that mean something to me, the security inside me that I'm okay with my God and myself, and that I can love my husband, I can be faithful to my husband, those kind of things nobody can take away from me. It's only when I decide to throw them away that they're gone. So I don't have to be afraid of you. I don't have to be afraid of you seeing me as I am. I don't have to be afraid of where I go and meeting people, and it's this fear of people. You know, I can't remember, why should I be afraid of another person? You know, most people in this world are not out to get me. I used to think they were. That's that self-centeredness, you know. But when I realized the reality of it is, I'm not a big deal. I'm not a big deal any more than anybody else is. I'm a big deal to me sometimes, you know. But it's not that big a deal. But no one robbed me of that security, economic or of any kind. It was me. The problem was from within, not without. And when I take care of the inside of the cup, the outside takes care of itself. And, you know, it's like back here in the summer, I told JD, I said, you know, I can't imagine what we're going to do. We've got, we got car insurance coming up on 2 cars, and I have a new car, and so the insurance on that is just astronomical. And personal property tax we have in Arkansas, plus the real estate tax, plus this, plus that. And I said, we only need, let's see, honey, I don't know how you're going to do it, but we need to come up with an extra $2,000 or $3,000 in a couple of months. Just thought I'd mention that. And while I'm out on the road having a good time, do something. And you know something, God, it met every one of those needs. Met every one of those needs. And it was amazing to me how God does things like that. You know, you get a check in the mail that you didn't even know that was coming, that kind of thing, and you say, oh man, that took care of the house insurance. Hot dog, you know. And I had already determined, and JD says, well, what if we can't pay the insurance? I said, God will protect the house. I just have to look at it that way, do the best you can, and it's like, you know, you don't go out to eat every night of the week if you're trying to pay a bill. You have to learn that there's a responsibility on your part. That's what always tickles me. I have this one girl in my sponsorship family that's always getting her utilities cut off, and I said, there's a problem here. And she said, yeah, she said, I'm not managing my money very well, I don't think. I said, probably not. I said, what do you think the problem is here? And she said, well, I put my money in the bank. And I said, well, where's the money for the utility? It was in the bank. Well, did you send him a check? No. You see, I hadn't had it in the bank so long, I just wanted to leave it there and just sort of look at it a while. And I said, was it easy to see in the dark? When you had to pay that $75 reconnect, did you think about that? Did you think about that? And she didn't do that once this year. She's done that several times. Obviously, she hadn't learned that lesson yet. And she's always running around thinking if she could just get enough money, she'd be okay. If she could just get her finances together, she'd be okay. She's not okay. And it doesn't have anything to do with her finances. She's not taking care of herself, and she's not trusting God. That's where her problem is. And she says, but I can't see how that has anything to do with the other. I said, well, it doesn't make any difference what you can see. What you see and what you thinking ain't working here. You know, I don't give a damn what you think. This ain't working. Look at the results. I said, all you have to do is ask yourself, is it working? If it's not working, change it. And she said, I did. I said, what'd you do? She said, I let the water go. I said, okay. You know, it just takes longer for some than others, you know, and I don't know what it's going to take there. Okay, 11. We will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. Intuitively. Don't you love that? I always thought women had that cornered. Women's intuition, you know. You know, like intuitively, I will know how to pick a partner every time. Every time. Every time. I don't know how to pick a long-lasting one, but I can do it every time. Did you know that your prayers and God's grace and mercy are just like 2 buckets in a well? While one goes up, the other one comes down. There are 2 methods of human activity, and according to which one of these activity people follow, there's 2 kinds of basic people. There's one type that use reason to learn what's good and what's bad, and they act according to the behavior, or to that knowledge of their behavior. And then the other type acts like they want to. And then they use their reason to prove what they did was good, and that because it didn't work, here's why. And that was the kind I was. I did what I wanted to do and justified and rationalized why it didn't work. And it was never my fault. I want you to know that. Never my fault. But I found that truth stands on its own. It doesn't require a lot of explanation and justification. You know, when somebody asks you something, it's real funny to me how, have you ever noticed how people answer a question with a question? Have you ever noticed that yes and no seem to be 2 of the hardest answers to get out of somebody? When you say, would you like to go out for supper? Well, would you? Well, where do you want to go? I mean, the question I had was a yes or no question. I didn't hear yes or no. What is the problem there? And it's like, we're not doing that very well. You know, we're not communicating. But intuition is the voice of God. That's the voice within me, and it speaks to us, and it gives me good orderly directions, and it helps me to make my decisions and things that keep me in my life in order, where I don't have to be in fear and confusion and doubt and second-guessing myself and should I really have done that or no, I shouldn't, and have all those big giant discussions that we have with ourselves. Because you see, when you're dealing with your higher power, I get what I call God confidence. And God confidence goes with self-confidence. If I'm doing what I feel God wants me to do, I don't have to worry. I can be confident in what I'm doing. I can be confident in what I'm doing, and I don't have to worry about how you're going to perceive it. And I can be happy, joyous, and free regardless when I make that decision. I have freedom to live life as I've never dared to dream it. I do things today that I never would have dreamed would have been possible. God has given me so many blessings. And prayer and meditation is the ticket into that new dimension called intuition. If you want to know what to do, you've got to contact who's in charge. And that's your higher power. And then it's called, like for instance, just little things, everyday things at the house. My husband's a welder. That doesn't mean he's an auto mechanic. It doesn't mean he's a washing machine repair person. It doesn't mean that he's an electrician. He's a welder. Now, if I need something welded, I know where to go. And used to, you know what I would do when something would break at my house? I would tell J.D. Why would I tell J.D.? And J.D., when he would hear me say the refrigerator's broken or the washer needs fixing, what he would hear is, J.D., fix the washing machine. Now, J.D. doesn't know how to fix a washing machine. But because I've asked him to fix the washing machine, he thinks, he feels honor-bound to go out there and try and fix the washing machine. Because he wants to please. And because I asked him to do it, he thinks that I think he ought to know how to do it. And so he thinks, well, maybe I should know how to do it. So he goes out there and he tears my washing machine to shreds. And then I have to call a repairman to fix my washing machine. And then he tells me that it costs more to put mine back together than it would to buy a new one. I had that experience. And you know, I didn't do that one time. I did that time after time after time. Asking him to do things that were mentioning them to him even. Because when he heard that, that's what he heard was fix it. And so intuitively, I began to do something different. And I would pray about it. When the washing machine would go down, I would pray about it. God, I don't want that kind of deal, what happened last time. And the voice would say, call the washing machine repairman. What a concept. And you know something, today when anything goes wrong, automatically, intuitively, I just take care of what needs to be taken care of and call the person who knows how to deal with it. And we don't even bothering him with that. And then all of a sudden the bills come in and I'll tell him, oh, by the way, I had the washing machine fixed or this or that. And he'll say, okay. And that's okay. And you know, that has caused a lot less confusion in our household. A lot. There's been many instances when I have had this, intuitive thing. I was one time with Jennifer, and we were riding on the sleet at home, and all of a sudden there was a bunch of car lights going every which direction, and she panicked and she slammed on the brakes, which of course started us spiraling around, and we were up on this big overpass, and I said, Jennifer, turn in the direction of your slide, hon. Just like that. It wasn't, turn! You know, which would have been my normal reaction. And instead, I repeated to her, Jennifer, turn in the direction of the slide. And she was so panic-stricken she couldn't. So I took the steering wheel and I turned in the direction of the slide just before we went off the top of the overpass. And we were in the middle of a 27-car pileup, and we were the only car that was not touched. And the police came and they said, what are you doing here? And I said, waiting for traffic to clear. You know, it's like intuitively knowing what you're supposed to do. I came in one night from a meeting. I'd been to an open AA meeting, and I came in, and you know how when you come in the house and at first you don't realize something's wrong, but in looking back at it you can say there were a whole series of circumstances that weren't right. Like, for instance, the dogs didn't meet me at the front door. There wasn't a light on in the living room, which normally there was. Those kind of things. And in your mind, I think as you're going through that, you think the dogs are out in the backyard. The light bulb must be out. You know, those little split-second things you do. But I came in on a robbery in progress in my home. And I can't tell you, terrified, does not even begin to tell you what the situation was. My gizzard was in my guzzle. I mean, I was just, bleh. And I don't know why to this day, but I ran into my dining room. Now, it's not a likely place to go in the course of a robbery, but the police told me later that I did the most absolute safe thing I could possibly have done because I cleared both exits so that there was no way that I would block them getting to an exit to get out of the house. He said, thieves that are robbing your home have come to get your stuff. They don't want to encounter you. And he said, and so when they're trying to get away, they will kill you if they have to. And he said, you did the most intelligent thing by going that direction. And I said, I didn't have any idea that that was the deal. I didn't have a thought process that says, don't block the exits. There was not one. It was intuitively, God took me in the right direction where I would be of the least harm. You know, I have to remember those things, that God has been there for me in the most desperate of circumstances. I don't have to worry about those things, that God will give me what I need when I need it. I don't have to worry about having it ahead of time, because it's no good to me until I need it. You know, that's just like having a certain appliance in the kitchen. You know, I don't need it till I need it, and it might as well be put up until I need it. But when I need it, I want it there. Number 12, we'll suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. Now, God has given us all many talents, abilities, and gifts, and He wants us to use them. Why else would He have given them to us? And many times we don't use those that we have, and we're asking for more. You know, we're real greedy people. We want God to give us more when we're not even doing anything with what we got. But God will not do for me that I can do for myself. Only the things I cannot do for myself. My job is just to suit up and show up for duty. It's just that simple. Asking God, what can I do for you today? Instead of, used to, I would pray in the mornings, God, here's your marching orders, boy. Now, I want you to do this, this, and this, and I want you to take care of this, this, and this, and I told God everything I wanted Him to do. Instead of saying, okay, God, I'm here, what can I do for you today that'll make life for myself and other people better today? What can I do today? And then do those things. Now, a lot of times I don't get these lightning bolts that come in and say, this is your mission of the day. I don't get that. And when I don't have a specific thing that comes to me when I'm doing my prayer and meditation, I do what's right in front of me to do. Those stupid things like my sponsor talked about, like making up my bed, cleaning my house, going to the grocery store, doing those little normal feeble chores, washing, ironing, whatever, talking to people, going to meetings, doing my walking, doing my things that I need to do for me. Unless I have other word, that's what I do. And you'd be surprised how things happen in your way. Like, for instance, my walking at the mall, I started walking, like say, when I got sick, and then I got sort of obsessive-compulsive about that, too. And now we do 5 miles a day. And I was walking one morning, and there's this boy behind me, and he said, lady, I want you to know something. You have great definition. I said, what? And he said, oh, your calf muscles or something. And I said, oh, thank you. Let me let you know, young man, this is never a compliment I have ever aspired to in my life. Having Arnold Schwarzenegger calves has never been high on my list. Thank you ever so. But I go out there and I do those things, and I have met people out there at the mall. I have another family out there. And you see, I had gotten sort of smug in the program about us being spiritual people and them being earth people. Sometimes we think that we've got a corner on the market because we're in a 12-step program. There are people out there who are well enough they don't need this. Isn't that amazing? It is to me. And I was walking, and there's a lot of people, and most of the people that are walking out there are walking because of health problems. And if you stay home on your butt eating wrong long enough, you can have them be walking with us too. But there's this man named Raymond. He's retired from the railroad, and he's retired with a heart condition. And Raymond would watch us, and there was several of us girls that would go out there and walk together from the program in the mornings. And then one morning they were talking about the fact that we were always hugging one another. Always hugging one another, and they thought we were gay. And so then they overheard some of our conversations and decided perhaps we weren't gay. And so one by one, the girls that were walking with me, one of them got a job and another one got married, and so they didn't no longer walk in the mornings. And so I said, God, you know something? It's real hard to get up in the morning and be committed to going over there to walk, even though I know I need to do it. I've gotten into the I can't, but we can. Now, God, I want you to go and walk with me. But I'd sure appreciate it if you'd send somebody with skin to walk with, because it just does easier when you do it with somebody. Now, see, I've learned that in this program. You're not going to be as good working it alone as you will be if you're doing it with somebody. And so, all of a sudden that morning, this guy, Raymond, walked up to me, and like I say, we'd been saying hi and whatever for a couple of years. And Raymond said, Murph, if you'll slow down a little, I'll speed up a little, and we can walk together. And I said, okay. I said, you know what you are, Raymond? He said, what? I said, you're an answer to prayer. Because I said, you know, you're more committed to coming every morning if you know you're going to meet somebody. And I walked with Raymond for a couple of years. Well, Raymond has lung cancer, and Raymond's dying. And I told God, I said, now, God, they've got married on me. They've done this. I ain't never had anybody die on me. Now, I don't like this. But, you know, Raymond's he's just a special love. I just love him a whole bunch. When he's not able to come walk, we go over to his house. When he comes to walk after those chemo treatments, you know, he can just barely get around. I don't care if we have to walk 1 foot an hour. We're going to walk with Raymond. But, you know, I prayed about that again, and God sent me someone else. Each time, God has sent me someone else to help me because He's doing for me what I can't do by myself. It's just real hard for me to be that committed by myself. But if I have, and I know I've got to meet somebody. I got a little girl now, it's a nurse. She comes and walks with me during the week. She only works on the weekends. I never knew anybody just worked on the weekend, you know. But God's doing for me what I can't do for myself. He's helping me, and I'm making the effort to suit up and show up. And so God does for me what I can't do for myself. There's so many miracles. I could share with you the rest of the day and night, but there's no point in doing that. I do want to tell you that God has helped me to stay in a marriage that I didn't think I'd ever be able to stay in. All those years of the drinking and then the years of recovery have not all been a joyride, I want you to know. And we continue to have ups and downs. I think it's called life. I think it's what it's called. It's called living. And we have different problems. You know, JD's getting a little older, and every once in a while he goes off into an I'm having an old day. You know, he's like having a bad hair day. Well, he has an old day, you know. And then he feels old and decrepit and sorry for himself, and I want to kick him in the teeth. And then, you know, when I hit the big 5-0, I had a couple of old weeks. And so you look old, you feel old, you smell old. I mean, you just are old, you know. And then I decided, heck, I'm just 211, what the heck, you know? No big deal. That was then, this is now. And I'm very grateful to be here. But I want you to know that this past Sunday, a week tomorrow, JD and I celebrated 24 years of marriage. God did for me what we couldn't do for ourselves. And you know, that goes against my basic belief system. I believed I'd never give more than 7 years of continuous service to any man. I mean, that was my goal from the beginning, you know. And I have the kind of marriage that I never thought I could have, because I can talk to JD and I can tell him how I feel, and on a good day he can do that too, you know. You know, sometimes feelings are just real hard. And sometimes he gets scared. When he gets scared, well, he has a tendency to isolate and hold within himself, you know. And then after a few days or weeks, well, then he has the normal, I'm going to have a fit crisis, and then he's able to talk about it. And I've just learned that that's how that deal goes, but I know, too, not to take it personal, because I can recognize it as fear today. And that's another thing God doing for me. Because, you know, a lot of times you have a tendency to want to take little picky stuff personal, when the little picky stuff ain't the problem at all. It's something else that they're not wanting to talk about. And when they get ready, they'll talk, because you can't make somebody ready to talk before they're ready to talk. And you have to learn to hang in. And it says, are these extravagant? We think not. You know, they're being taken care of. These promises are being fulfilled. If you don't believe so, look at your own life and see how many of these have come true. And if they haven't come true, ask yourself, what step did I not work? Where did I shortchange myself? Where have I skimped? Where have I not done the deal? You know, where have I not taken care of what I need to do? And you know, we have a promise that we have in our group every darn day. And that's our group promise. Keep coming back. It works if you work it. And if you'll let it work. If you're not so stubborn that you won't let the love of the group. You know, the group's love can carry you for a while, but you're going to have to take an action. And I guess that's about it. And I thank you for your attention, and thank you for having me.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Tell me what you think. Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with, and it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.